Looking behind me, I may not look like a beginner, but I love doing beginner type projects. Especially with 2x4s because they're so inexpensive and easy to find. And after all the 2x4 projects I've been making here recently, I had a great comment. This was from a young 60-year-old who had just started with their DIY, and she said, "Can I make a video telling beginners which are the most likely tools needed for these beginner 2x4 projects?" Thank you, Tammy. That is a great comment and a great idea. So let's do just that. To answer this topic, I first have to bring up a few questions. First off, is this just going to be a hobby, or is this going to try and be a money-making side gig? Also, how big is your space? Is it pretty long? Is it pretty narrow? Are you working outside? What is that? On top of that, how much do you have to spend? Do you have a lot of money now or just a little bit of money now? And do you by chance live near some of the big box stores, or are you going to have to buy everything online? On top of that, there are a ton of other questions that you really won't think about until you're actually in the buying and making process. And we'll deal with some of that later. And the best way for me to answer these questions is if I was completely starting over. No nice tools, no nice shop, and just a little bit of money. What would I buy? Let me show you. First off, I'd start looking at the big box stores. A lot of times they have combo kits, no matter which brand they are you prefer, that'll usually have at least a circular saw and a drill included in them. Some of them have a few extra tools, some of them won't. That's just really up to you. A couple other things I would look for. If you're just starting out, you're going to need some kind of a tote to carry your tools in, and a lot of these combo kits will come with some type of little tote for you. Also, looking at the batteries. Some of the combo kits will only come with one battery, and I really don't like those. I prefer the ones that actually come with two. And the reason why is a lot of times, especially me, I'll forget to charge that one battery, start to use it and realize, oh no, it's dead. And now I've got to wait possibly 2 hours for it to charge so that I can get back to my project. But if you got the two, you have a backup, so where that first one's charging, you can keep working. Now keep in mind that these kits can vary greatly in price. You can have some as little as $200 and some as great as $1,000. That's because it depends on the brand, the store you buy it at, and just the quality of the tool. But here is a great way to save a little bit of money. Whenever you're buying those kits, a lot of times around the major holidays, Memorial Day, Father's Day, Christmas, Thanksgiving, there's usually a big sale going on at these big box stores where you could potentially save hundreds of dollars. So get online, watch those prices, and save a little bit of money. Now that we have our starter kit, there's a few other small tools we need to pick up in this process to make your woodworking really enjoyable. First off is a good quality measuring tape. I've seen these come anywhere from 4 feet long to over 100 feet long, but you don't need those extremes. You need to get one that's somewhere in the range of 12 to 16 feet long, and that should be very helpful for almost all of your projects. And of course, make sure it has a good lock on it so that it doesn't move easily when you lock it into place. So get your good measuring tape. The next item would be some clamps. You definitely need these to hold your projects together as you're screwing and gluing them together. Now of course, clamps come in a variety of styles. This one you squeeze, this one you screw together. Now these are usually a little bit easier to find and usually a little bit less expensive, but these will hold those projects together a lot tighter than your clamp ones or your squeeze clamps ever will. So I would prefer these, but if you can only find these, just as well. Now, once you've determined which clamps you're going to get, I suggest getting some that are at least 6 inches and some that are at least 12 inches, and that should give you a nice versatility in your projects. Now it's time to get you a nice straight edge. This right here is actually just a 4-foot level, and I recommend your straight edge being at least 4 feet. You can get it longer, it's up to you. But this right here is great for making long cuts on plywood. You can allow your circular saw to ride along the edge of it and make sure that your cuts are nice and straight. The great thing about these is if you take care of them, they can last you a lifetime. In fact, this right here was my grandfather's. That's why it looks all old and stained. Take care of it, and it'll take care of you. Jumping ahead, we need to make sure we get a good set of drill bits. Now, just about every major brand makes their own sets. The big thing you're looking for is a good variety of sizes. You want all these different sizes because some projects require smaller and some require larger holes. So make sure as long as you have a good variety, it should do well. The next item on your list should be a speed square. This little tool is great at helping you with angles and measurements and cuts and doing it all really quickly. In fact, I just recently put out a tips video on this to make you be able to use it a lot faster. If you're interested in that, I'll put a link to it in the description, so make sure you check it out. Otherwise, pick yourself up a speed square and make those cuts easier. Since we've picked up some good tools, we now need to pick up some good fasteners. I would suggest some good quality screws. Now, screws come in a variety of sizes. For example, 1 1/4, 1 5/8, 2 inch, 2 1/2, 3, so on and so on. I'd recommend getting 2 1/2 inch for most of your 2x4 projects. Now, I highly recommend getting the ones that are exterior screws, because that way you can use them inside and out. One of the big mistakes a lot of beginners make is buying drywall screws. These are those black screws. They're usually inexpensive, but these are meant to be used for drywall only. Do not use these with woodworking. They have a big tendency to break off real easy, and if they do, they're extremely hard to use. So avoid the drywall screws and go with the thicker, better quality exterior type screws. And while you're shopping for those screws, I'd suggest looking for some sandpaper as well. Get some that's somewhere around 60 to 80 grit. Get another one that's around 120 to 150, and a third one that's somewhere close to 220. Just in case you don't know, the smaller the number on sandpaper, the larger the particles are. In other words, it'll remove your material or your wood a lot faster. Versus the larger the number, it has smaller particles and will remove that wood a lot slower. And one more thing on sandpaper, I would suggest getting the better quality name brand stuff. It has a tendency to last longer, but it does cost more than the cheaper stuff. Now, the cheaper stuff will work for you if that's all you can afford, but just keep in mind you will have to replace it faster. Next up, don't forget your paint brushes, your application brushes. Whether you're using paint or stain or just some kind of finish, these brushes come in real handy. I have a tendency to buy the cheaper versions, but that also means that these little bristles are a tendency to fall out into the project and you gotta pick them out. You can buy the higher quality ones, but they are a lot more expensive, and if you use a bunch like I do, the higher quality ones is going to cost you a lot. That's why I have a tendency to go with the cheaper ones. The next big item you need is some rigid foam insulation. And if you look at this, it looks like there's a bunch of cutting lines through it. That's because there is. This right here is great. You can lay this on the floor, take some of your large plywood sheets, put it right on top of this foam, take your circular saw, adjust that blade so that it's just barely thicker or barely deeper than the thickness of your plywood, and you can cut this directly on the floor. That's because the foam, as you can see here, takes those cuts and doesn't allow that blade to come in contact with the floor, making all your cutting jobs so much easier, especially when you're starting out. And those are some of the real basic tools you'll need to get started. But let's just say you've done this for just a little while and you're really starting to enjoy woodworking. Let me suggest a few additional tools that can really take your work to the next level. When you purchase your first combo kit, it needs to come with a drill, but sometimes it also comes with an impact driver. A drill is great for drilling holes and can be used to add screws, but a lot of times as you're using it, especially if the screw gets stuck, it has a tendency to twist your arm and your hand and your wrist and can be painful at times. But an impact driver, because of the way this actually uses like an impact, in other words, it goes like tap, 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 almost like a hammer on the actual screws or whatever you're putting in. It doesn't have nearly the twist to put on your wrist. It's a lot more enjoyable to use and sometimes a lot faster than your standard drill. I made a video in the past telling the differences and benefits of each of these, so if you'd like to see this in a little bit more detail, I'll put a link to that video in the description, so make sure you check it out. Next up, I'd suggest getting a random orbital sander. Just about every brand out there makes them, and keep in mind, usually the cheaper they are, the lower quality and not as good a, well, sanding job. In any case, make sure you get some good quality paper. Sometimes you can find this more expensive stuff, which I have a tendency to have been using here lately, versus the standard paper, which works if you're beginning. Now, I will usually go with 120 grit, but that is totally up to you. I also have an in-depth video on all the benefits and tips that you can use with your orbital sander so that you can get the most out of it. I'll put a link to that video in the description. Now, this tool has a tendency to be a little bit controversial when I say it's for beginners, but I highly suggest a pocket hole jig. This just happens to be a name brand from Craig. You don't have to have this one. You can get in more inexpensive versions on Amazon and get some other brands. In any case, I'd suggest getting the kit, which comes with some extras and it allows you to get started a lot faster. Now in my case here, I've mounted mine to a piece of wood. You don't have to do that. You can just leave it by itself. That is totally up to you. When you do buy your pocket hole jig, I definitely suggest you get some pocket hole screws. You cannot use regular screws with this. You have to get the ones that are specifically designed to be able to use in those holes. So be careful and buy the correct screws. I next suggest getting a jigsaw. Now, some people love these and some people hate these, but they're really handy when you need them. The great thing about jigsaws, it allows you to actually cut like figure eights and curves and circles out of whatever you need to cut. It also comes with a variety of different blades to make faster cuts, slower cuts, pretty cuts, and just whatever you need. Now, of course, as before, I did a previous video on this going in depth and telling you all the tips and tricks that you can use with one of these, so make sure you look in the description for that. Now that we're starting to collect tools, if by chance you're still sticking with the battery operated versions, I suggest getting a couple extra batteries. Just about any time I'm working on any major project, I'm going to drain at least one, if not two batteries in that process, and it's nice just to have those extras on hand and you can just grab them and keep going. If you keep an eye out for major holidays, as before, you can usually get these at a really good deal, so watch out for that. At this point, if you're enjoying woodworking and you really want to take it to the next level, we need to start investing in a little bit more expensive tools. For example, a miter saw, or in this case, a sliding miter saw. Now this will allow you to cut angles really quickly and make sure you get all your cuts done over and over really fast, a lot safer and a lot easier. Now of course, this is not cheap, but if you get a nice one, it'll last you a lifetime. Now that we're starting to invest in the larger tools, I would highly recommend getting some kind of a dust collection system. You can get a smaller version that works with a vacuum or a larger version like this. Of course, you're gonna have to buy the tubing and the piping to make sure you extend it to all of your larger tools, especially if you're gonna buy the miter saw like you did before. All these larger tools have a tendency to kick up a ton of dust, and you want to remove that from the air as fast as possible so it doesn't get into your lungs. Next up, I'd suggest getting a table saw. Now this particular one is a very expensive version. They sell much smaller contractor type table saws that are a lot less expensive than this particular one. But keep in mind that a table saw is extremely dangerous. I mean, you could easily cut off all your fingers before you've even realized you've touched your blade. So be very, very careful using it. Now this particular one has the ability to actually stop the blade and get it out of your way at the first sense of it touching a finger. I've seen testing with this and it's amazing at its capability to do that. Now, if by chance you do have the money and you do have the ability to have this in your shop because it is kind of large, I'd suggest getting a saw stop because of that capability. But otherwise, there are a bunch of other machines out there that'll do just as well cutting your wood, so a table saw is a suggestion. I'm gonna stop right there, but I do have to say there are a ton of other tools out there that you can buy, but I wouldn't necessarily suggest getting them for your absolute beginner. For example, a router table, a bandsaw, a lathe, a drum sander, and so much, much more. Once you start into woodworking, you'll just be amazed at how many different tools are out there, and like, wow, some of these can get really expensive. Now don't forget, look in the description, I have several other videos listed so you can have a little more in-depth study of a lot of these tools so you can get the most out of them. Now, with that said, I hope you get a chance to get out in your shop, or wait, I hope you get a chance to go build your shop. Have fun building.